Geology, Geology, and Geology. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist at KPFT HD2 channel. Welcome to another program of the Mini Geology radio show, where we put in connection geology with society at large. And we have in here in the house the editor of the AAPG Bulletin. Bob Merrill is here with us, and welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Here we are, Bob, and the AAPG Bulletin is a monthly peer-reviewed technical journal whose mission is to advance the science of geology, especially as it relates to energy, hydrocarbons, and mineral resources in general. Bob, how did you become editor of the AAPG Bulletin?
Well, a friend of mine convinced me that I should be the editor, and so I ran for editor. But it's something that I've always enjoyed.
Which are the qualifications that you need to become editor of such an important paper for geology?
I would say that you need to have a broad background in geology. You should be an expert in a few aspects of geology. You have to have an inquisitive mind, and it helps to have an understanding of how to write a scientific article.
Tell me more about that inquisitive mind.
About the inquisitive mind, I guess that probably one of the a good example is that wherever I am, I'm always looking at the geology. And I've done this since I was very young. So I want to understand the processes. I want to understand what I'm looking at, how the rocks are in their current situation, how they were deposited. So it's not only the rock, but it's the physical processes that put the rock into that perspective. And it's not only the rocks, but it's also the surface, the geomorphology.
When you ran for editor, who did you have to compete with? I mean, which kind of professional figures?
Well, in the year I ran, I was running together with a former Shell geologist, very experienced, who'd written a number of papers.
Why did they pick you?
Why did they pick me? I don't know.
But you're happy in your role?
Oh, I'm quite happy with the role, yes.
What is the role of the editor? Can you describe it?
The role of the editor, as I see it, is to, first of all, have a vision of where you think the Bulletin and the AAPG should be going in terms of science, because you want to choose articles for publication that your membership is going to read, that are going to be useful for the membership. And as technology changes, as our understanding of geology changes, they need to be aware of that and aware of the new tools that can be used as well.
So science and technology. And what is the vision that you are bringing to the AAPG Bulletin? So what is your North Pole for the role that you have as an editor?
Well, I mentioned the role of the science, but more specifically for the Bulletin, I feel it's important to try to solicit articles, solicit manuscripts that correspond to that vision. For instance, I think it's important for people to have analogs and understand basins. So there will be a special issue of the Bulletin that has to do with the recent Super Basins Conference. I've now developing another special issue that has to do with carbon capture and underground storage. Because as a geologist and as a petroleum geologist, we do understand the subsurface, we understand the reservoirs. So it's not only pulling the fluids out of the reservoir, but we're also putting fluids back in. So we have to understand those reservoirs.
So you gave us a couple of examples where you're doing special issues with the carbon capture and storage and the superbasin, which is a concept where...
And these fit into the normal progression or normal publication where we have manuscripts that are submitted that are unsolicited. And one of the, I'm looking for specific articles also that has to do with subsurface geology, reservoir characterization in particular, field analogs. I think field studies are important because analogs are very critical to our work as petroleum geologists.
When you say field analogs, you mean in the outcrop?
No, in the subsurface. So pick a large field, a field that's been produced, that's been very successful. How can we use that information? Because no two fields are exactly alike. But there are certain parts of that system that are similar, but there are also differences, and it's important for us to understand the differences as we do our exploration programs and development programs.
That is what we call the compare and contrast.
Yes. The AAPG Bulletin is subscription based. So yeah, you need to subscribe. You need to be a member.
You need to be a member. You need to pay if you are not a member to read the magazine, because also non-members can read the magazine and can write in the journal. Why do you need to have readers paying the journal instead of having the open access?
Instead of open access, in part, it's the journal helps to fund the AAPG as an organization, and many of the articles will become open access, and we're now dealing with the open access problem, or I should say, dealing with open access because if everything's free, then and it's necessary for it to be free, then why have an organization like the AAPG?
You still need people with experience to guide what to publish, right? How to publish, etc. Like many.
And there are certain countries now that demand open access if the funding comes from the government.
Yeah.
So the AAPG is coming. We together with an open access service, we can now facilitate that.
So can you explain a little bit more what is the relationship between open access and pay-per-view in the AAPG Bulletin?
Well, open access would be it wouldn't be within the AAPG Bulletin, but it would be with a partner that's open access, Geoscience World, and if a paper that is submitted must be submitted under open access, then AAPG will still peer review it. We'll have 2 to 3 reviewers that say whether that review the paper, and oftentimes there are a number of revisions before it's publishable. So it'll be published with an AAPG approval, just as a paper within the AAPG Bulletin is reviewed. So they'll both be peer reviewed, but it's important for us to recognize the open access issue, as well as have specific benefits to our members and our membership.
Is this already occurring, or you are talking about the near future?
It's not in place quite yet, but it's happening. We're working on it. We're working on all of the materials. Maybe
2021?
I don't know the exact date it's going to happen.
Can you describe a little bit the readership? Who's reading the AAPG Bulletin, so the bulletin of the American Association for Petroleum Geologists, beyond the members?
Beyond the members, everyone in the geological community. AAPG Bulletin is in most libraries. And when I was in graduate school, if if I was looking for a specific topic that or a specific paper having to do with geology that was pertinent to the AAPG Bulletin, then I would go to the AAPG Bulletin just like I'd go to any other scientific bulletin. So it's part of the whole research process within the scientific community.
And there's a pretty wide membership for the AAPG. We're talking into the several thousands, right? How many members in AAPG?
It's just under 30,000. So maybe 27,000, somewhere in there.
And what do you like about the AAPG Bulletin? Because you're familiar with many other scientific journals. What is it in specific that you like about the Bulletin that you are proud of?
Well, the main thing is I've always used the Bulletin to look for analogs in my exploration and in my profession, because I might want to be I might be exploring for a particular carbonate or a carbonate. Well, where can I find similar reservoirs? Where can I find similar structures? What are the elements of that structure or the elements of that program that are pertinent to the work that I'm doing? And the bulletin is full of those examples.
What would you like to change?
The main thing to change is being sure that assuring the membership and making sure that the articles that are published in the journal are pertinent to the membership, so the membership wants to read them.
How do you know that? How do you double check?
Well, I have not been able to double check. It's just anecdotally at this point.
So is the perception you have when you go to the conferences, you meet the other members, is more, as you said,
yeah, talking to members is the only way that we have at this time to.
You do not receive any emails talking about this topic, suggesting how the AAPG Bulletin should write, what it should write about? You never have any kind
Everywhere
of
I go, every meeting I go to, I try to solicit manuscripts. What do you want to read? What can you give me in terms of a manuscript that other people want to read?
So how are you going to pursue and achieve this goal that you have?
I go to a few meetings. I've got enough years of experience that I've got a very broad group of people within the profession that I know, and each person has a network beyond that. And so if I come up with an idea, then I start working with these people that I know, and eventually it all comes together.
How much time do you have to accomplish this?
Well, with the downturns in the industry in the last couple of years, I haven't had a lot of billable hours, so now I've got a lot of time.
And for how long are you going to be editor?
It's a 3-year term.
And this is my
first year.
First year. Okay. I see. Do you think the AAPG is American-centric?
I'm trying to. I don't think it should be American-centric. We have a very large and diverse global membership as well.
But is that reflected in the articles written
yes.
in the bulletin?
Oh, very definitely.
Oh, you take care about that?
Yes.
I
think it's important. So I'm going to a meeting in Bahrain soon, and one of the reasons I'm going is to try to solicit manuscripts from that part of the world, because I know we've got a number of members from there.
And how are you going to keep in the standard high, since I think that the standard of AAPG Bulletin is high? Do you think that also other places in the world, they write, they are allowed to publish the same kind of material that you are familiar with here in the United States?
Oh, yes. The difficulty is with English usage and grammar from some certain countries. But we've managed to get through that whole process, and it may be 4, 5, 6 revisions, but we'll get there.
So are you, Bob, editor, you as an editor, are you shaping the science, the technology? Are you trying to steer it, deciding which kind of articles to welcome in the AAPG Bulletin, or is the technology and the science that is deciding how the bulletin is going to have?
I would say it's both. So I'm actively soliciting, and I'm not driving the science by myself, obviously. We have a whole group of people. I've got a group of associate editors. I've got another group that is involved as well within the AAPG. And if I've got questions or I talk to
What is this
them.
other group?
It's called the Charles Taylor Fellowship. And it's a group of past editors and active people within the AAPG.
And this is a group that you contact when you need steer or suggestions or
yes,
consultants?
when they've got suggestions, they're also involved in choosing the best manuscript, the best manuscript by a young professional, the best memoir, because we have awards for each of those categories.
Can you tell us more about the role of the associate editors and also senior associate editors?
The senior associate editors and the associate editors, they're a huge help to me, because when a manuscript comes to me, I will assign the manuscript to an associate editor or senior associate editor, or I will invite the reviewers myself. So I take on some, and the associate editors and senior associate editors take on another part of that load, because in the last couple of years we've had 300 manuscripts, or almost 300 manuscripts submitted. So that's a huge workload for one individual to review every manuscript, comment on every manuscript. And so that group of associate editors and senior associate editors helped me with that problem.
And how did you cherry pick them?
Well, many of them have been in those positions for a number of years.
Is that a position that how can I become an associate editor?
Call me and tell me your qualifications.
All right. What are the
or email me.
What are the qualifications that you need?
You need to be an expert somewhere in aspects of petroleum geology. It helps to have written papers so that you understand the writing, the paper, the how to write a scientific article. Because we want to end up with a scientific article. We don't want to end up with a report, and there's a big difference between the two.
What is the difference?
A report is what you would write on a research project that you have in graduate school, and that generally is not the same as a scientific article, because there's a lot of detail in the report, and in the scientific article you want to be, it needs to be well organized, it needs to convey a message. A report does not necessarily convey a message. It's a report on what you did.
And is it possible, since the associate editors, there are several, probably intuitively they are, not all of them, they have your mindset. Not all of them, they would naturally follow your vision. Do you talk with them? Do you train them? Or how do you handle this issue?
Well, periodically I'll talk to them, but not very often. But I will respond. You know, when I get so the associate editor will find the reviewer and then summarize the reviews and refer it back to me for acceptance. So particularly when I see an extraordinary written review, I'll communicate with the associate editor.
Is there any internal debate you have in the AAPG Bulletin on how to run it? What is the concept that should be the North Star?
Well, there probably is, and I'm not necessarily aware of it. I've got my vision.
What are two competing ideas that could emerge within a journal like the one that you're editing?
Well, there could be a group of people who feel that the science of the bulletin is going in the wrong direction. There could be a group of people. Let me use carbon capture and underground storage as an example. There may be a group of people who don't see any benefit in that because it has nothing to do with extracting hydrocarbons from the ground. On the other hand, I feel it's important because in order to do underground storage, you've got to understand the reservoirs, and who understands the reservoir better than the geologist?
And I also think that, in a way, with these special issues that you're welcoming, at least you steer into one direction, good or bad, but into one direction that you want. The science and technology that arrives to the bulletin, because otherwise you're just accepting what it falls down to you.
That's right.
And the only tool you have is picking the best of those things that they arrive.
That's correct.
What are the emerging topics? Now, you talk about these two topics that you help to let them emerge, like carbon capture.
Carbon
storage.
capture one. I've got a vision of a future special issue having to do with call it geodata, artificial intelligence, handling large databases as a geologist. How do you take a large data set and reduce it down to the essential information for what you're doing?
By essential, you mean what is useful?
It's all useful, but there are certain parts of it that are critical, so you have to understand the critical elements.
And you have also to decide what is the question.
That's right. Well, you better have the question before you start looking at the data, before you start your search. You got to understand the question. And as I showed you this little letter I got from my graduate advisor.
Tell us about that.
All right. Well, he called it the seat of the pants memo, and it has to do with research. And it starts out, what goes on in graduate schools? The Republic of Learning imposes obligations on its citizens, and a basic one is that they must put their scholarship at the disposal of one another. And the first aspect, then, is any of them is free to call on any other for help and can confidently expect it. But no one needs help until he's in trouble, and a bibliography is what you start with. The bibliography, in this case, would be a big data set. It's your job. You make it yourself. The first step is not to write to someone saying, I'm beginning a research project on this or that, where will I find the material? The first step is to go to the library. Now, remember, this was written a number of years ago. To go to the library and wear out shoe leather and the seat of your pants till you're sure you can't find anything more by your own efforts. And he handed this to me my first day of graduate school and said, here's the seat of the pants memo.
You brought here another historical piece in a sheet of paper that is more yellow than white. What is that?
Well, that one is a scrutiny of the abstract. Now, one of the things that we had to do in graduate school, and every report that we write was to do an abstract. And remember, an abstract condenses everything to the essence of what you're doing. And you have to do it in 250 words. So, obviously, with that background, now as an editor, I see all these manuscripts coming in, and you'd be surprised how many people I've sent this to.
Okay, what is this?
This is it's an article written in 1951 and revised in 1966 by a former editor of the AAPG Bulletin, Ken Landis. And he's called A Scrutiny of the Abstract. And he wrote it because he was seeing so many poor abstracts. And that continues today. Because People don't write abstracts the way they should. So I can use an example, and he puts an example in here. And the first example I'm going to give you is a poor abstract. The behavior of editors is discussed. What should be covered by an abstract is considered. The importance of the abstract is described. Dictionary definitions of abstract are quoted. At the conclusion, a revised abstract is presented. So that's not a very exciting thing. An abstract is the first thing that, other than the title, that a person reads in an article, sees an article. In my entire time as a geologist, I read the abstract. If it doesn't catch my interest, I probably will not read the paper. So the abstract has to engage the reader. So let me read a second one on the same subject. So the abstract is of utmost importance, for it is read by 10 to 500 times more people than hear or read the entire article. It should not be a mere recital of the subjects covered, replete with expressions as is discussed and is described. It should be a condensation and concentration of the essential qualities of the paper. So can you see the difference?
I can listen.
There's a significant difference.
Yeah.
And most, I wouldn't say most, but I would say at least half the abstracts I see, they don't condense and concentrate the essential elements of the paper.
We are in conversation with Bob Merrill, editor of the AAPG Bulletin. Bob, you are also trying to help the potential writers of scientific articles, and you are preparing a webinar, or you have already prepared that.
Yes.
I think that you could talk to our listeners about that. And before talking about that title, I need to ask you, what is your position on the content of the AAPG Bulletin, science versus applied science, or basic science versus applied science? What would you say to the listeners about this topic?
I would say we both are desired. Applied science is applicable to a certain part of the membership, and the science that's in development in terms of the next big leaps, that's important too, because there will be members that are going out and with new ideas and new concepts and new technology. So we need to have a balance, and we need to have both involved.
All right. So back to how to write an article. Let's start from the title.
Okay, let's start from the title. So today I was looking at a manuscript, and it had over 30 words in the title. So by the time you get to the end of the title, you're kind of going off to sleep. The title should only be 10 to 20 words, and it has to capture the attention of the reader. Otherwise, it's not going to be read. So it differentiates the paper from other papers of the same subject. And the other thing to remember in today's world, that words in the title and the abstract are picked up by search engines, databases, and journal websites.
Oh, so that's only for the title and the abstract?
Well, that's certainly one of the first places that these words are picked up.
Okay.
So if you don't have a word that makes it stand out, it's not going to generate the interest. And one of the things that why you're writing a paper, because you want to tell the world about this, and then you want to expand that world. So, but that's a very important part of the title and the abstract.
Talking about why you want to write a paper, Sometimes it could be because we want to tell to the world
Right.
a specific concept, because we're passionate about it, or because we think that we want to reach out or to give back.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the writers, they do it because it's their profession. They have to do it.
Right.
They have to do it. Do you see a difference in these two different approaches on writing a paper?
I would say that many of the people who have to write, particularly younger ones, I think, their papers read more like reports.
But that is probably because they're young and they don't know how to write well.
I think so. That's part of it.
And so
Certainly.
they're immature to write.
Yeah, they don't seem engaged as engaged as somebody who is really really focused on what they're doing.
You see, they're kind of forced to do it.
Yes.
You feel it when you read it.
Yes.
I see. In fact, another thing that the listeners they would like to know, having you as an editor in here, is what we call as an impact factor.
Right.
The impact factor. What is the impact factor of the AAPG Bulletin?
I don't know the exact numbers, but the impact factor has to do with how many references, how many times that paper is referenced, and what's important for the impact factor and people finding your paper, the title and the abstract.
Yep. So yeah, in fact, that is another very important character element that the writers they look at when they are forced to write. The impact factor.
And it's much more of concern to people in the academic community.
Exactly. Which are those that they are probably, which I call professionals of writing, because they have to do it to get their job, to get the tenure,
yes,
and to demonstrate that they have value. Unfortunately is the way to judge a researcher.
Right.
Nowadays. I find it very useful to listen to you when you perceive these different kinds of writers. I assume that when the academics that they are experts and mature, they would also write nice articles. But it's interesting that you can perceive that difference.
Yeah, you can feel you can feel the passion. Whatever, it might be a high, very passionate.
Hype.
It might be, I need to do this.
More about the titles.
More about the titles? Not much more to say about the title.
Okay.
Just that it has to capture the imagination of the reader.
How many words?
10 to 20.
Okay, so not too short, neither.
Well, you can have it shorter than that, but no more than 10 to 20.
All right.
Because 10 to 20, now you're starting to get into an abstract in the title.
Well, you're tempting me now, because if all the words that I put in the title that are going to be key words for the browsers or search engines, then
they also occur in the abstract. They also pick that up. Remember that.
Okay. So anything else about the abstract?
Well, the abstract, as I said, it has to convey the essential information that you've got, and it also say, why is this work relevant? Why are you doing this? What are the implications of your findings? The idea of why is your work relevant? If I don't see that in a paper or an abstract, why did you write it? And that's part of the the process of, well, this guy really didn't feel like he wanted to write something. He had to do it. And the abstract really is it's a brief, it's factual. I said it's 250, maximum 300 words. So it's a summary, and it's a factual summary of the contents and a factual summary of the conclusions. It's not a conclusion. So how did you go about what was your objective? How did you go about achieving it? What are the implications of your findings? This, boom, right there, 250 to 300 words. The other part about the abstract is it should not be written until you write the paper.
It's the very last thing.
It's the very last thing.
Yeah. I also find that sometimes if you read an abstract that then it doesn't correspond to the text.
Well,
even
even
manuscript, because it was written before.
Even writing an abstract for a meeting, an oral presentation. So you write the abstract in September. The meeting is in May of the following year. Well, maybe you may not have done all the work to get to what you really need to say, but you've got to have an abstract.
Yeah.
And I've done the same thing. You try to get it as pertinent as possible, but by the time you get to give the paper, it's quite different from the abstract.
Yeah, that's a problem in the conferences,
Yes.
especially now that they are requiring the abstract for so many months in advance.
Yes.
Especially the deadlines, they are so early with respect to the actual day of the presentation.
Right. Right.
What else? Introduction?
The introduction. The introduction really should go into, let me go here. First of all, I should talk a little bit about what the abstract should not contain. It should not contain information that is not present in the paper. There should be no surprises when you read the paper. It shouldn't have tables, shouldn't have figures, there should be no abbreviations, there should be no literature or reference citations. So I've told you what it should contain. Now I've talked a bit about what it should not contain.
So you say that the title in the abstracts, they're important, but I would say also the figures.
Well, the figures, though, you don't refer to them in the abstract.
No, but people, they probably see the figures before reading the abstract.
Well, that's not unusual. We all do that. But the figures are a critical part of the scientific writing, but they're not referred to in the abstract.
Yeah.
And the paper should have an introduction. In the case of geology, it should have a geological setting. There needs to be the data, the methods. You need to have the results. You need to have a discussion, and then the conclusions. I would say it's not uncommon to have data, interpretation, discussion, and results all mixed together.
Not good.
That's not good. That's right. Not good at all.
You know that some we talk about scientific writings, and we think about scientists doing the scientific writings. And probably if you study a lot of science means that you don't work a lot on literature and reading and so on. But reading in school, what is called reading in elementary school, is like one of the most important things to then communicate the science that you do, because science is not such until you communicate that.
You have to communicate the science, and the thing about a manuscript or a paper is that it puts that information out there for posterity. So you had great ideas, you did wonderful work. Well, if you're the only one who has that, nobody else knows about it. It might sit in your garage in a file box, but really the rest of the world, there are things out there that the rest of the world should know about.
And I think that students should engage the professor and ask them to teach them how to write better, how to communicate through a scientific manuscript.
Right.
Because I don't know if that is one of the most important courses in the earth science departments.
I think very few earth science departments have it, and that's why these two pieces of paper that I brought down here that are quite yellow, and one of them is actually an old mimeograph paper. Why those two pieces of paper have been so important in my profession, in my career.
But that also tell us
when I got to graduate school, I was not a good writer.
But since you wrote two pieces of paper but only two, and you probably are very valuable to you, it also means that you probably didn't have a proper course about it. You just have a good mentor, a good advisor that gave you this.
I had an excellent advisor who demanded that everything I wrote had to conform to his requirements.
And what was the third requirement? I see also a little book in here.
So not only did I get these 2 pieces of paper, but he told me to buy a copy of the suggestions to authors of the reports of the United States Geological Survey.
The USGS.
The USGS, yes. It's a wonderful resource on writing style.
Yep.
In terms of English usage, in terms of the things that you can put into a paper, things that you shouldn't put in. It gets right down to English grammar, English usage and grammar.
What about AAPG? The association is doing anything to help the members to write better?
Well, Gretchen, a previous editor, Gretchen Gillis, she and another former editor put together a training course on how to write a scientific article for the AAPG Bulletin. And I was talking with somebody earlier this past year who challenged me to put together a webinar because she felt that students would like to know how to write an abstract or how to write a scientific paper. They need some guidance.
Yeah.
So what I want to do with this webinar then is provide some guidance. And I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about writing and give my critiques. I've taken a couple of papers that obviously were written by students, and I've gone through and redlined them and sent them back, giving them suggestions in terms of usage and grammar and terminology. You know, don't make up new terminology if there's already something there.
In my case, it has always been very useful, the major revisions of the reviewers. They help me grow professionally and scientifically also.
Right.
I think
they
that
do.
the reviewers, which most of the times, if not always, they are volunteers. And I thank them. I thank all of the reviewers.
All of our reviewers are volunteers.
Yeah.
All of our associate editors and senior editors are volunteers.
Yeah.
I'm a volunteer.
You're a volunteer?
Yes.
As an editor?
As an editor.
I see.
There's no salaries come to me.
Well, thank you all reviewers for volunteering and to teach me and maybe Bob also during your career and dedicating time to teach to somebody that you don't even know.
So one of the things I think that's important, and you were talking about writing and having reviewers read it and getting the feedback. I think when you write, the first thing you have to do when you finish your manuscript is read it yourself. Read it out loud. Does it flow? Does it communicate what you want to communicate?
No, I can read it loud. Come on.
Then have a friend read it before you complete it and get their feedback. And if they have, they'll have suggestions on things. Then the next stage is, if you're writing it for publication, it would be to submit it for publication, because some of these reviewers have a lot of suggestions. They'll go through the manuscript and they'll have word changes. They'll have questions. Why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't you include this reference? Oh, by the way, you forgot my paper.
By the way, Bob, tell us how do you see the optimal reviewer? How would the reviewer be in your mind?
Well, I try now not to send an article or manuscript to a reviewer where the English is so terrible it's difficult to understand. So I'm actually intercepting him and returning him and saying, you've got to fix this. So that's number one. Number two, once they get this, I want them to look at the flow of the paper, Does it make sense as it flows? I want is the sentence construction good? Is the grammar reasonable? How about terminology? Are they using appropriate terminology? Have they missed something? So many of these reviewers, I try to pick a reviewer that has expertise in this particular area. So they've got the expertise. They can, has the author have enough data to support their conclusions? Does the interpretation make sense from the data? So these questions then are being answered by the reviewer, and then looking at the figures. Do the figures make sense? Do the figures really fit into the paper? Is there a scale and a map?
An arrow to the north?
Is there an arrow to the north? Is it legible? Do they have red on a blue background that many people can't read? Things like that. Are the fonts and the figures appropriate? Are legible?
Is it difficult then when you receive the review of 2 or more reviewers, and you have to read the reviews?
I read the reviews. Well, actually, my job is to read the reviews and then succinctly capture that review into the letter that goes to the author.
What is the most difficult thing in your role as an editor?
The most difficult thing? It's probably sometimes capturing the essence of the reviews. Now, the reviews actually go back to the author, but I need to communicate to the author why the reviewer might have an issue with a particular point.
So we need to train also the reviewers, ideally.
Well, at this point, I haven't had a problem with most reviewers. There are some reviewers that, oh yeah, this is okay. But for the most part, the reviews come back and they're quite detailed, even to the point of having a manuscript that's all marked up.
Yep. But the reviewers going through the process of the peer review is what enhances the quality of the papers.
Absolutely. That's why the whole peer review process is important.
One thing that I don't like that much when I act as a reviewer is to understand that in a plethora of authors, probably 10 authors, you understand that none of the co-authors has fully read the paper. You really understand it. There are some basic mistakes that nobody caught.
And that is a problem. And sometimes the reviewers will actually catch those mistakes because the co-authors have not read the paper. They're just there because, they were part of the project. And the co-authors, if they had read the paper, they would have added a lot to the final manuscript before it was submitted.
Do you have any position on how the co-authorship of a paper should be, or you are completely open?
Completely open. Yes. How am I to know how much work each co-author put into the paper? You don't know that.
So, Bob, how can the listeners reach you, and how could they come and see your presentation about how to write or see the webinar?
When the webinar is complete, there will be an announcement in the AAPG Explorer. So the Explorer is more of a popular publication of the AAPG, and there'll be an announcement that this is available, and there may even be might even go out as part of an email blast to our membership. So
you were scrolling the webinar that you have almost ready. Do you have anything else to tell us about how to write a scientific paper for the AAPG Bulletin?
I could probably give you a couple of things that I see wrong in papers that come through. And one is that people often use a conjunctive adverb which just, and a conjunctive adverb is like mainly or principally, and all it does is add words. In most instances, you don't need that. So cut that out. It's interesting to see how many, with respect to grammar, how many people use a personal pronoun, like we. You shouldn't use personal pronouns in a scientific paper. We did this, we did that, we show this, or I did this, I did that. You just don't do that. You don't use that personal pronoun in a scientific article. You should use concrete language and examples. Be very specific. And I said, when you're done, read the work aloud to yourself or to a friend. Have the friend read it. And then send it out to the journal editors. The other thing that's very important, and this is something I learned in Toastmasters, and that is, don't take the reviews personally. They're trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take it personally, because don't worry about the correct. Someone will correct your usage, or someone will correct your grammar, or they'll say, "Well, you can't have you never covered this part." Well, think about it. Did you really cover it, or is the reviewer right? He probably didn't cover it. Maybe it had to do with the structure, where the author has mixed up results and discussion and introduction. Or another example is, I've seen papers that have the abstract and the conclusion say exactly the same thing. No, you don't do that in a scientific paper. They should be different. So it's that you're doing your paper for posterity. You want other people to read it. And the thing that I want people to remember is that you first read the papers that inspired you to be a geologist, to inspired you in your work to be successful. And so by writing a paper, it helps you enjoy that process and give back to all the people before you who have shared their results.
Thank you very much, Bob. We're in conversation with Bob Merrill, editor of the American Association Petroleum Geologists Bulletin, a monthly peer-reviewed technical journal whose mission is to advance the science of geology, especially as we heard about the hydrocarbons. Bob, we still have some minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You have an open mic and you can shout out, you can talk with the listeners. It's all yours. Go ahead.
I don't know if there are any listeners out there who want to talk to me right now. Last time I was on this program, I was talking about Geoscientists Without Borders, and I'm still active in supporting Geoscientists Without Borders, although I'm no longer on the committee.
Yeah, tell us what is Geoscience Without Borders, because Bob was here in the episode 7 a couple of years ago. We are in episode 93 now.
Well, Geoscientists Without Borders is a group that is part of the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, the SEG, supported by the SEG Foundation. And the objective is to fund proposals for humanitarian work around the world. So the GWB has funded water projects in the terms of identifying where to drill water wells. In that instance, we had a project recently that was brought to our attention. The project was done a couple of years ago in Uganda, and in the process of doing the project, they trained a number of people on the technology, And it turns out that these people are now passing on what they learned and finding and identifying locations for water wells in Uganda. So, and part of GWB's purpose is to build relationships, so that and pass along the technology and the efforts. So from a very small project, suddenly you've expanded that project and left a legacy there, which is part of the wonderful thing about this Uganda project that we learned about. We've done projects on with geologic hazards. It might be earthquakes, or earthquake preparation, or tsunami. We had a project in Indonesia on tsunamis where they were able to predict and understand the frequency of tsunamis and help the people understand what they needed to do if they felt the earth shake. And so if the earth shook for 20 seconds, the people realized that they had 20 minutes to get 20 meters high, because they could get above the highest previous tsunami. We've done projects with environmental on pollution issues. Food security is another one where we've done projects having to do with agriculture and using geophysical and geological techniques to optimize irrigation. So there are a lot of different facets that Geoscientists Without Borders has done since 2008, I think was the first year that we funded one.
Where can the listeners reach you at this other alter ego of Bob Merrill, the Geosciences Without Borders? Is that geosciencewithoutborders.com or .org?
It's actually a website within the SEG.org website.
Okay, so it's
just Google Geoscientists Without Borders and it will come up.
Geoscience Without Borders. Well, thank you, Bob, also for this volunteering in the Geoscience Without Borders. Thanks in general for giving back to society with your volunteering as an editor of the AAPG Bulletin, and for helping communicate the science and the technology, which is the final step that science and technology they have to do in order to reach society. Maybe at the very beginning just with the professionals, but eventually to society at large.
One of the things that I've been very aware of in my career is communicating geology to non-geologists. I think it's very important.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you.
This was another program of Mini Geology Radio Show. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist at KPFT HD2 channel in Houston, Texas. Goodbye, everybody.
You can bet your soul. They did the boogie with a study roll. They mess around. They're doing the mess around.